I'm enjoying the mystic magical music. Very calming.
All right, you're good to go. All right, it is live on YouTube. You're good to go.
Thank you, Alex. Yuli, are you ready? You want me to pause a moment? We're going then. Let's proceed. Good afternoon, everyone in the boardroom and Zoom room. This is the Board of Directors Legislative Committee of the East Bay Regional Park District. We're meeting on Friday, April 21. And we're beginning at 12:34 p.m. Would the committee clerk please describe our Brown Act procedures?
Yes, today's meeting is held pursuant to the Brown Act. The East Bay Regional Park District intends to hold meetings through a hybrid platform of in-person and remote attendance to allow members of the public to participate via remote attendance through the Park District's virtual platforms. Designated staff will, with limited exceptions, participate in person at the Park District headquarters in Oakland, California. Occasionally, members of the committee may attend remotely pursuant to the Brown Act as amended by 249. All right, this is Ashley Grenier, your recording secretary, taking roll. Chair Coffey.
Present.
Director San Wong. Here. President Waspy.
Here.
Park District staff participating in this meeting include Deputy General Manager Dr. Ana Alvarez, Chief of Government and Legislative Affairs Eric Feeler, Legislative and Policy Management Analyst Lisa Baldinger, Acting Legislative Assistant Ashley Grenier, Executive Assistant Yuli Padmore, Federal Advocate Peter Umhofer, State Advocate Doug Houston, members of our SAGE team, members of the grants team, and our Prime Gov staff assisting, as well as Lynn Orgel, General Counsel. Orgo, General Counsel, my apologies.
Thank you, Ashley. Then we will turn to the first item on the agenda. If there's no other housekeeping, see you.
One more, I will state the ways that members of the public can submit public comments.
Okay.
We're providing live audio and video streaming. Members of the public wishing to make a public comment can do so live via Zoom by submitting an email or leaving a voicemail. This information is noted on the agenda. And if there are no questions about the procedures, begin.
Sorry, turn my sheet over. We do not have any members of the committee participating today, so we can now start the meeting with our first agenda item. Good. Deputy General Manager's comments, Dr. Alvarez.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Director Coffey, members of the board. Today we have the benefit to learn and hear from a national renowned survey consultant, Mr. Ben Tolchin of Tolchin Research. And the survey was one of the most robust voter surveys in which the Park District has ever embarked on. And you will find the results of interest since, suffice it to say our agency continues to be well regarded, but also we have a lot of work to do. Given the inflection in the state budgetary challenges, our approach in securing public resources through grant programs becomes even more important. While some people argue relatively that the Park District is doing relatively well in grant funding, as a result of your leadership and the good work of the Park District staff, or what we like to say, the people behind the mission, the reality is that we must continue to advocate urgency for funding sources and increases in existing funding resources. This is absolutely necessary to be able to accelerate the important resiliency work forward to amplify our impact in ensuring that the public lands that we steward are durable as the climate change continues to increase, to create lasting changes in how we manage these lands and the perpetuity of these lands. As our federal advocate, Peter Umhofer, will share during his update on the Resiliency IPCC report, strong fiscal investments in climate mitigation and adaptation are absolutely critical now more than ever. And that's one of the reasons why we continue to work with our delegation on the proposed statewide resources fund 5067, which you'll hear more about today. And we're also focusing on our advocacy on wildfire mitigation as one of the top priorities for the Park District, workforce development, sea level rise preparedness, equitable access to these public lands, wildlife habitat and habitat refuge as we see the climate changing and different animal species taking refuge on our lands. We also are looking at and exploring healthy watersheds. So as you hear the survey results, these advocacy goals align with the public sentiment because our public, the communities are having to continue to feel firsthand the changes or the adverse impacts from a climate change that at one point were just conceptual climatic models, but now we're feeling it, that we're seeing it as we saw at the beginning of 2023. And lastly, in the incoming months, we will continue to advocate and engage our community in these efforts because as we continue to redefine and reimagine how the Park District is engaged, meaningfully engaging communities to achieve equity, climate equity, but also engage our taxpayers, the 3 million people who have an expectation that we will continue to steward public lands in perpetuity, which seems now a vision that's in peril given what we're seeing with our the changes in climate. So we have a lot of work to do. And I just wanted to give you, as part of these opening remarks, somewhat a framing of all of the information that's coming to you today. Thank you.
That was well done and appropriate. Thank you. Bringing us to item 2, Government Legislative Affairs Report. And I believe we have our guest, our Eric, going to introduce the topic and our guests.
Yeah, I'll make it brief. Dr. Alvarez gave some very good overview of what you'll be seeing from our survey pollster, Ben Tolchin. Ben is a nationally renowned survey pollster. He's worked on both Bernie Sanders' presidential campaigns. He's worked for Governor Gavin Newsom, recently worked on both of the Georgia Senate races in the last election. And he's also worked with a number of environmental groups, Defenders of Wildlife, California League of Conservation Voters, as well as a few major national labor unions. So Ben is very thoughtful, and I think you'll find the presentation very interesting and illuminating. So with that, Ben, if you wouldn't mind getting up and firing up the PowerPoint.
Ben, while you're setting that up, can you briefly tell us about your firm, not representative engagements that you've had that Eric just recited, but just what, who, and where your firm is?
Sure. Ben
Demo.
Tolchin Research. And appreciate the opportunity to be here today and work with East Bay Regional Park District. I am based in San Francisco, done a lot of work in the Bay Area for in statewide on park and conservation work, including generating revenue for state parks, including statewide park bond in the past. And so I've done quite a bit of districts as well up to past work in San Francisco. So it's been to show up on the screen, but so yes, and so it's, as Eric mentioned, we're a century of working on conservation issues and advocating for conservation parks. So this was I appreciate the opportunity. We sent the team on the survey. I should say, Dr. Al mentioned that there's work to do, and it's always easier to have 100% positive news to deliver. But I think Eric, at least in the team, Dr. Al noted in her remarks that the point of polling is to learn, right? Give you guidance and feedback and data to help you improve your operations and hopefully increase funding for your operations. And so the poll is a good reality check on things over. And I think the important piece to understand is second is polls snapshot in time, right? In this a couple months ago, and if you step back and look at what's happened since last survey, we've had highest inflation in decades. We've had a very challenging economic environment, and we had record rainfall, right? So concern about wildfire still tops the list, but it's an urgency. Pouring rain every day. Just gets somewhat diluted. Sure, pun, some intent. But so in that context, that's why you vote, right? Because you want to just do say, okay, that's set in stone, and there's nothing we can do about it. So the good news is the poll showed encouraging opportunity, some challenges, opportunity, and I'm not full to give you guidance on how to improve your position. So, get to share my screen first. Can everyone see that? Okay. Yep, there it is. Okay, and then I'll put in presentation. Okay, great. All right, we'll walk you through it here. So we did a poll among 500 likely November 2024 voters in the Park District. We conducted the poll in February, from February 1st to the 6th, as I mentioned, in the middle of kind of one epic atmospheric river after another. And interviews are done in English, Spanish, and Chinese on both landlines and cell phones, as well as texting respondents on their cell phones and voters on whose emails are on the voter file. So we call this a multimodal survey. It's kind of our industry's changed quite a bit in terms of our approach and methodology. Previously, I'm very used to like phone-only surveys, but now we find the most effective approach is to reaching people through multiple modes, which is a landline, cell phone, texting, cell phones, and email. And the margin of error on the whole sample of 500 is 4.3%. Just to give folks a kind of survey research, I know done survey research in the past and maybe familiar with it, but social science, we start with broad questions to get a kind of sense of what people's perspectives, opinions are broadly, and we kind of boil it down to specific issues. In this case, questions about the local park district and funding for the park district. Right now, this is kind of the impact that inflation has had. We asked a basic question: do you feel things are going, on the right direction or on track in your local county, either Alameda or Contra Costa? And you see, largely speaking, people are kind of more negative, positive, not overwhelmingly negative, but 41% say we're on track over the whole district as a whole, 43% in Alameda, 39% Contra Costa, so fairly similar between the two counties, but a plurality are somewhat more pessimistic. And in our views, inflation really has impacted people in significant ways. It's unnerved them, really made them very insecure and unsure of the present future. Again, for most people, it's the first serious bout of inflation they've really had. I mean, people about dealing with inflation they've had a long time, and in particular for older people living on fixed income, working class people, inflation is very, very, very challenging.
Ben,
Yes.
in terms of the presentation, your plan, would it be better to interrupt and ask you questions about a slide in front of you, or try to wait, see if we can come back to it?
That's a good question. I don't mind. Probably better at the end. Thank you, Brad. Probably better save your questions at the end so I can present and then we can go back. I think that makes the most sense for flow. Does that work? Okay. Yeah, I think hold your questions to the end. I think it's better because I'll tell the story and then I can go back and come bring the slide back. but thank you for asking. So then the good news is voters respect and like the East Bay Regional Park District. I think you're doing a good job. 78% approve of the job you're doing operating your regional parks and trails. So that's a very, very strong number. Only 7% disapprove, 15% aren't sure. And it's obviously that's, to get sort of revenue measure, third support. So this is a good number. It's okay. A super majority of the public voters have faith in you. So the issue of inflation, in my view, is kicking in. But then we ask people about parcel tax, and there's much less support for that. It's 56%, including, we say, ask if you definitely support, probably support, or undecided if you're towards supporting it. We tested proposed language, including $36 that was in discussion about how to generally maximize the amount of revenue, not asking for too much and risking too much support. We include accountability measures, including independent audits and citizen oversight. But you're under 2/3, right? So 26% definitely no. So you have some resistance to this, and to put this number in context, in past polling they did just almost 2 years ago now, 2021 pre-inflation, we're at 60% about 70% with later. So the hard yes, definitely probably yes was 60% almost 2 years ago. Now it's at 52%. And you see the definite yes was 46%. Now it's 32%. The definite no was at 9%. Now it's at 26%. So it's nothing to do with anything you haven't done. It's inflation has really impacted people just to pay money out of their pocket to fund essential services. And so this slide tells us that through fault of our collective efforts, just people's economic outlook and personal economic situation, they're feeling much less generous. And so that tells us there's the work, as Dr. Alvarez mentioned, there's work to do. Now we did, give arguments in favor of supporting parcel tax and services that you provide, benefits you provide the community. We gained some support, but not a lot, which tells us there's resistance right now. And again, I equate to inflation, people's economic situation. So that you have to do is you're going to have to make a concerted effort to communicate all the great things that you do to voters explicitly, right? I mean, parks that you operate and provide as public service get you to 56%. So you convince people are maybe frequent users of the park or are frequent users but don't understand the backlog of maintenance that you're facing, and you have to tell the story. And we look at demographic groups by gender, support than others, but look at it by age. It's a linear correlation of support based on age. The younger the voter is, the more likely they are support are the most likely to support. They're about 2/3, but then you see the stair step down, and seniors are split on it. And you've seen this not just in your district, but in other districts. If you're retired, senior, and a fixed income, inflation has hurt, right? If your income is fixed, but cost of food has gone up, cost of gas has gone up. Housing is always a problem in the Bay Area, but it's the intangibles that have really impacted people's net income. And so when we're asking now, just a $36 parcel tax, even that, voters are now resistant. Right? 2 years ago they were done. So it just tells us the impact that this inflation spike has had on people. So the good news is you do have support with younger people, and that tells us, well, okay, if you do put the revenue measure on the ballot, clearly a higher turnout, general election is going to be a better opportunity for you to maximize support, but to do some communication, persuasion with folks over 30, particularly. Bipartisanship, Democrats are on board, but not overwhelming. So at 68%, so they're barely 2/3. Republicans strongly against it. Not a lot of Republicans in this district, but enough to make it impact, but independents who typically are supporting measures are barely supported. So again, it tells me just the impact that inflation would have. You would like to see Democrats being in high seventies or 80s, right? Like to see independents more at 60%. And again, 2 years ago there, but now based on ethnicity, obviously it's diverse communities in the country, and Caucasians are supporting it. 61% Asian American voters are, and 16% African Americans are 62. Latinos are struggling. We've seen this with Latino, and Latino community where they tend to be disproportionately working class and much more sensitive to economic issues, crisis, and costs. And so this is an area where inflation is really impacted. So for a partial tax this district. And Measure FF special district, we know it's always been more supportive of measures, even in that district, where past efforts have passed, we are still 66%. So and outside of that district, it's split. So if you were to put a measure just at Measure FF special district, could win, but if challenge would pass, you without breaking a sweat. So that just tells me inflation, nothing that we've done, but just inflation has impacted people so dramatically that areas of past support, we've had incredible support. Okay, but now haven't passed. And by ideology, you see progressive voters are fine. Although again, I would say we want to see progressive. They're 75-70% respectively. I'd just like to see progressives to be 90+ without any question. So again, back to inflation. My conservatives against it, but again, not many conservatives in the district, and they're always going to be against a revenue measure than for it. And just so frequency of park visitor, frequent visitor, 60% support. So that's good, but not above 2/3. So that's a clear opportunity to educate all the folks coming to your, and half of all the voters we talked to, again, it's a representative sample of your district. So electorate are frequent users. So I think you have just to educate the people coming to your park, use parks regularly, to tell them about tell shortly go the messaging that resonates best, but to educate them. They're using your parks, they think they're great, but they know the challenges districts facing. And by geography, I know folks can represent various parts of the district. Not a big difference between Alameda and Contra Costa support measures, but not dramatic support. But then again, I just see that the inflation doesn't see party, right? It's impacted people left and right, and you see that left voters now are wanting to take money out of their pockets. Here's opportunity. So I talked about challenges. Here are the opportunities. These are subsets of voters who you asked them initially how they were voting on the measure. There are more told them communicated various messages, which I'll share with you in a second. They increase their support significantly. So you have target pockets of voters that are persuaded. How do you go from where you are 56% to 2/3? You have to persuade some people. And these are subsets of voters, including Asian American women, Republican women, independent men under 55, white independent voters, 55 and over. So list, but there's a clear subset of voters that if you engage in a public education campaign, which I would recommend, the parties are supposed to think of, okay, these is 2 big counties, a lot of people talk to, hone your message to target these audiences so you can try to move it as effectively and efficiently as possible. And then in terms of messaging, did 2 types of message testing, tested kind of shorter statements highlighting specific elements of basically full district, and we did kind of thematic messages. Of the individual elements, wildfire risk was number 1, as it has been in the past. You see on a scale of 1 to 10, and it was basically 7.9, almost an 8. Intensity, the number of people gave it a 10, it's 47%. So it's still number 1. Now intensity is down from the past fall, for example, the height of fire season. Fires raging up and down the state. the numbers were higher. So that's why I told you at the outset, the snapshot of time. We pulled in early February and might as well had a decade, if not a century. And obviously wildfire risk is still a big deal. And if we pull again full wildfires raging, I imagine these numbers would be higher. Next is, I think, very important point to make. We saw in a few different responses to the survey. Existing trails was number 2 versus adding parks or just expanding what you're doing. What was very clear with this electorate right now is that they're in a conservative in terms of not wanting to spend too much money. And if you're going to spend money in Berries Park District, they want you to spend money on existing trails. The backlog of maintenance is essential. Not go out and buy new parkland and invest in new services. I mean, it's clearly, and they told us that multiple ways. So when you have an electorate that's more, not ambitious, but conservative in scope right now, my experience has been to get them to say yes on a revenue measure like this. Just back to basics, essentials, fix what you have. Don't go out and say build, acquire a lot more farmland and do anything fancy, right? They just want you to kind of improve your existing operations, which they think you're doing a great job, but you have to tell them that challenges you're facing. Other elements protecting, restoring wildlife habitat, restoring ecosystems impacted by drought. Again, that's an issue that's done well for you in the past, but there's still drought. But like with all this rain, as I often tell folks, voters don't throw them for breakfast. So if we're thinking, okay, the drought's even over because it's rain time. So again, messages in the past have less impact due to circumstances. Oversight, key with an electorate that's kind of entrenchment mode, you have to reassure them that you're spending wisely, right? Oversight, audits, and ensuring that you're doing a good job with their taxpayers. Financing audits, as I mentioned, like accountability and expanding parks. These are additional items tested. Expanding parks was, so as I mentioned, fix what you have, did well. Expanding parks did much lower. So here are the thematic messages, and I won't read every one, but thematically, focusing on fire was number 1. A close second was existing services, telling, restoring your agency. We have $99 million worth of deferred maintenance. Many facilities date back to the 1930s, almost 100 years old. You got to invest in existing facilities, bathrooms, trail and park maintenance. So again, back to basics. Deal with the backlog of existing services, and the effects of climate change do well, especially with the younger voters. So these are 3 themes that did quite well. And then we tested a couple different messages, focusing on mental health, again, expanding different kinds of services. As important as the services are, again, voters telling us stick to the basics, to focus on your backlog of maintenance and then get the top 3 messages based on key demographic groups, and you see consistent fire does best. African Americans, fixing existing services. And then this is where I mentioned, reassuring voters that you're spending their money properly. We asked you to agree or disagree that I trust these Bay Ridge Park District and properly managed tax dollars. Plurality say yes, agree with that. 26% don't know. So got to reassure people. They're concerned about the bottom line. They're concerned about inflation's hit their pocketbook pretty hard. They're open to giving. You have to ensure that money is being spent. So just as a summary, and then questions, they this park district in high regard, and so you are doing a good job in parks as their and a solid majority supports a revenue measure, but might inflation shock that people have suffered. Support for potential partial tax currently falls short in the 2/3 threshold. If you want to pursue a revenue measure, public education, communications effort to boost support in your term. And then, so here's some guidance I would provide based on the polling, consider a lower dollar amount. Eric and my team spent a long time talking about, like, you know, which are important, but my job as a pollster is to give you reality what's feasible, right? So some money's better than no money, right? Even if it's not. So consider a lower dollar amount for the parcel tax. We tested 36, consider 24. Including sunset. We didn't include the sunset of the ballot, like we tested various durations. We found the shortest the duration, the better. So again, for voters, a sunset is a form of accountability. They want to have a chance to. So again, sunsets are difficult because you want to be able to plan for capital planning purposes, and budget purposes. But typically, it's easy to improve a revenue measure or renew it rather than approve for the first time. So a shortest sunset duration of that is possible, including stringent accountability measures, include some of the language, but that has to be your mantra. They say strict accountability. Held in public forum, you're having it, the public can monitor this. That's one example, but just accountability measures are key. And then focusing a message that focus on fire, especially in the fall, this fire season, I presume, and highlighting that, trying to communicate fire prevention and mitigation, and then your story, a powerful, compelling story, but knows it that you're in your federal agency with a lot of deferred maintenance needs, and this money is essential for dealing with the wonderful services you provide, the parks you provide, the people of. I think the reality is, the surveys, the people your facilities don't realize that. And then targeting communications. Obviously, our media covers this wide range of people, but if you can find ways, to target these communities that to messaging, I think you'll know in a significant way, in a full way, so that it sets you up for success if you pursue a future. So let's see if my power folks have questions.
Okay, that was a lot. It's a lot to digest, and correct, if we went slide by slide, we'd still be here. Lengthy period of time. So I'm gonna speak for, because I think I'm fairly safe in this. We're gonna need to digest this and maybe questions better, because I don't feel that well prepared. How quickly. So I just express that as a caveat to the following conversation, that probably need more follow-up either at some level. So I'll come back to committee members. And who's ready to go? Who's ready to go?
Thank you. That was a great presentation. Yes, a lot of information. So I'll start with some of the more process questions. So this be presented to the entire board of directors at the session, or see this report, be able to ask questions, have a discussion. So
Yes, thank you, Director Swanson. You have an opportunity to participate, to bring back this presentation to board as part of the study session as we formulate our legislative program for 2020. So this is coming and anticipated early fall of 2020.
some other questions, not necessarily directed at this survey itself, but in terms of our measure WW, when does that end in terms of being on property taxes? 2028?
2008, so 20 years would be 2028, but I've heard in the past we're not really on a 20-year.
My understanding, and I'll circle with our finance team and get back to you, that we're on a timeline looking at towards 2034 for the component of Measure WW expenditures. But in terms of the look at the property tax itself, I'll have to circle back to you.
is the goal of a potential parcel tax that we're discussing here in this poll to be continuation of Measure WW, to be in addition of Measure WW? Are we still discussing that to try to figure out what works best for us?
Happy to take that question. So our Measure FF is our current, it's not a parcel tax, but it functions similar to one, and it's in a subset of the district. So the East Bay Hills out to the shoreline from just north of Oyster Bay up to Richmond. And that's a parcel tax, and the benefit of the parcel tax is it can help to fund maintenance, staff, FTEs, et cetera. Measure WW is a bond measure, so it's really supportive of our capital program. What this polling was looking at was a district-wide parcel tax, so we could increase staff support and opportunities district-wide. So it would be in complement to the bond measure, which supports capital investments.
Waiting for somebody to talk.
Parcel taxes are for operations, ongoing day-to-day operations, whereas the
I don't know.
is
It's cutting in
a
and out.
general obligation.
Okay, Zoom is bad too.
Deborah,
Oh, we're having some tech.
so I'll start again. WW is a general obligation bond issue that there's pass and agreed to cover its debt service for capital acquisitions. So one is day-to-day operations. The other is general obligation bonds that are for capital acquisitions, property or facility. And 20 years was the intent. So when we all went out in 2008, which WW was for the map of actual acquisitions for the next 20 years. We're not spending money as fast as anticipated in 2008. So it's being stretched out for vision going out for another general obligation bond for acquisitions.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. And then in terms of this poll, because there's so many different parcel taxes and different bonds and different items that are on our property tax statement, for example, was that something that was included in the question to just ask about the other measures? I know, for example, BART is a good example right now in terms of some of the different items that we might see on our property tax statements, and then also some conversation about BART maybe going out to voters in the near future. And that's just one example. Did those types of questions get included in this poll?
No, and intentionally, because the goal for this poll is to see how your measure did on its own. And what typically we do in a process like this is if we got threshold or above threshold, then we go back into the field and then include a few other measures to kind of muddy the waters for a voter and then see if that makes them back away from this measure, for example. But since as a standalone, it didn't get to 2/3, but since it's early in the cycle, so that's kind of our process is see how it does as a standalone. And in this case, we're below 2/3, so to give it a tougher test. But that's what typically we do is you just do as a standalone if you threshold back in to see, at this stage of the cycle, a lot of folks are talking about going to the ballot, but who knows actually who ends up on the ballot. So you don't want to make your life harder than it has to be when it may not be that hard, right? So that's our approach to this.
That makes sense. Okay, that's fair. And then the only other point I'll make, and again, this is a little bit separate from the poll itself. And again, I think the comment about wanting to digest the information is really important one. And so it's good to know that we will come back at a study session and be able to look at this more in depth. But the other point, that this is voters, so it doesn't necessarily include all residents, within our two counties, and it doesn't necessarily include all property taxpayers, because certainly it's possible to own property and pay property taxes without being a registered voter. So I just want to make that point as well.
And I would like to share, so as part of our work plan, we do conduct 2 surveys annually. One's the voter survey, and the second is the community survey, which is reflective of the entire East Bay community.
Director Waspy.
Thank you. Thank you for the survey. So when can I get a copy of this? Can I have a copy of the survey?
Sorry, Director Waspy, I catch what you said.
Yeah, I have a copy of the survey.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, great. And then that would include the follow-up persuasive questions. Okay, Great. So I guess first off, gosh, I'm bummed by this you know, I hope that in the future we continue this, but I hope in the future, if I asked a question, especially of the Regional Park District, you know, do you support district on measure? And 39% of people said no, or lean towards no. I'd be really inquisitive, and I'm not suggesting you or anybody else, but I think suggesting that inflation is the answer is. I think that's the easy way out. I would have, and we follow up with a question. I mean, when I talk to people about why they never support this incredible agency, I hear things like, you know, it's got everything's in land bank status. Buy up property, should never open up. Safety is the biggest issue. So our safe surveys ask what's going on in our district. It's safety. You know, I'm wondering if we can hone it down. Are you not voting this because we've had swim lagoons closed throughout the summers for 3 years now? It's like we're going to do more of that. We're closing parks, which is fairly new. It's nobody's fault, but I'm just suggesting become a park and it's closed because of weather. Is that the reason you're not voting for it? Because I would think inflation is, I bet it's not the tie. If you include some of these, I would say you consider the market share value. I think it's about that value that you pay 36 extra. I'd like to hear a response to that. Some of those questions are, why aren't you? I know you can't leave no because God, it's anything, but if you some of the key issues will be here all the time. It's, everything's parks aren't safe, restrooms are bad. I mean, if we could kind of hone down that, because inflation is inflation. I mean, what's the least inflationary thing you can do? Except go to the park, enjoy the park. Yes, they cost money, they're accessible. Escape from inflation, I think.
Yeah, those are excellent questions and points. One thing I would say is, said Eric shared us the past poll done, and honestly, the results were surprising all of us because you had decent support for some tax pass. So I just know from our and districts around the state, and we've seen a drop in support for measures, particularly outside of the core schools, right? I mean, school voters tend to support revenue measures for school. They tend to have the highest rate of success for passing, and then anything outside of school depends on setting and being a good standing. For me, 70% prove the job you're doing. Typically, that says great job. I'm happy because I support. I support what you do, but no, I think if we can follow the survey, those are definitely questions I want to ask. Well, why do we know? Why would you support parcel tax when 2 years ago they support? So that's why it's not just in this district, we're seeing that impact districts as well. So it's not. I don't see something personal about this Bay Ridge Park District. It's broader, and you see the types of voters that have been most impacted: seniors, working class voters who are most impacted by inflation right now, much less likely to support some tax than they were just 2 years ago, pre-inflationary spike. But those are questions. Survey we control them all. Especially the subset of voter I want to talk to proves the job you're doing, but it's not voting yes.
That's it. Thank you for that statewide perspective. And one thing that I wanted to add once is a great highlight of the goal of longitudinal survey. And then also point around the community survey. In last year's community survey, we did have a response from our public that 94% found East Bay Parks to be a strong value public resource. So just reminding that we do have that high value of our community. And the question is willingness to pay additional funding for our services. And so I think you hit the nail on the head with that comment.
What percentage?
94.
Thank you. Could you one more time, please? I this all the time. A likely voter is who?
Yeah,
people are likely to vote. I understand.
Yes,
That's gotta be a better definition.
likely vote is someone the way so we use voters pulled from a voter file, and have the vote history. So likely, so has to have won past elections similar to elections, so it's a presidential elections that have been released once in the past on a presidential election, which is not a very restrictive screen, but it's indicative that they have voted in the past. And the best predictor of voting in the future is past voting behavior. So, but it's a very broad screen, so it's highly reflective. Basically, this sample, like the 2020 electorate, is probably 5% of the electorate, right? So it's almost every voter.
And Director Waspy, to your question about other reasons, we have historically asked questions about safety. And I think snapshot in time that been referred to at the beginning is part of the context for this particular survey. On February 1st, the Feds had just raised interest rates a half or 3/4 of a point. The governor had just announced budget deficit after a year of much surplus. And so the context of the point in time is definitely part of this gravity of the poll. But we do test other items such as safety. I think visiting these facilities, I think it's telling that one of the things that moves to the fore in an economy where people are kind of on what they have, they see funding going to maintenance and fixing what we have, and I think that happens when you're people that maybe not wanting to spend money on much of anything. So I just wanted to contextualize that a little bit more. Appreciate your input, because I think we dive into that to some level on the community survey, especially with regard to feel welcome in our parks and common safety, it's different things, different people. So it's another area we drill down into.
Dennis's question made me think of something about likely voters, just in your general polling and the electorate. Are you seeing some trends, the bigger picture trend in terms of likely voters? For example, do you see more voter engagement amongst younger voters compared to maybe previous presidential elections, or is there some other just big picture trends to think about?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, the 2024 advantage of a 2024 electorate, November 2024, is a presidential election, which gets the highest turnout imaginable of any possible election, midterm or primary. So, and we saw support among voters under 30, the highest support for partial tax. So, but my experience in turnout is it depends on who and what is on the ballot. I mean, presidential elections drive turnout. We've seen in 2016, 2020, and 2018 actually as well, that having Donald Trump on the ballot or in the conversation drives turnout with younger voters. When he obviously is running again, so that will likely drive turnout among young people next year. And so you talk about if 2024 is not an option, 2026, that's a gubernatorial race, that's an open governor's race. So it's harder. I mean, if you look at historical patterns of turnout, turnout in a governor's race is much lower than a presidential descent. Competitive governor's race, better turnout than not. So those are variables you have to factor in the equation. But we've seen, you saw the kind of middling support among Latinos on the parcel tax, and we've seen that in the last few years. You've seen actually Donald Trump doing better with working class Latinos in 2016, 2020. Partly based on economic reasons, and then with inflation now, we're seeing the Latinos tend to vote heavily Democratic in California, but with inflation now, they're more of a swing vote, and you see them they're a swing vote now, like a partial tax measure. So, so even if you get a good turnout with Latinos next year in a presidential, there's persuasion, right? So, to the Latino community, to convince them to support services. So those are good questions, and one thing where, but again, you don't go to the ballot or even better turnout with young people. given where you are in our polling, right? So I mean, that's the trade-off you have to make where, now in 6 months, maybe support improves, and then you can reevaluate going to 2024. I mean, typically you want to go to Val in 2024 just because, we're not in how well with young people. But if you're below 2/3, then it doesn't, point, you gotta hold off, then you look at 2026 or 2028. Just gotta be prudent about it. Because the one thing I would never do is recommend you go forward if you don't have a chance of winning. I mean, and even if you're above 2/3, there's no guarantee that you'll win. Just you have a good chance of winning, but then you still A, have to put a campaign together, B, have to build support in the community. Because if you get opposition, resistance that opposes your effort, obviously you've been successful in the past in the ballot, so I know you're able to do that, but they're just a poll early on in the cycle saying you could win doesn't, right? It's not a guarantee for success, but right now you're not there yet, but hopefully circumstances changing, inflation coming down, wildfire season reemerges. I mean, obviously that's bad news, but it could change people's perspective of funding for parks. And then I think you get outreach and education too, especially to visitors parks about and about the backlog and everything else, and that you're doing with the resources you have, and you're very use them as effectively as possible, but it's not enough.
Survey was conducted in November.
February 1st to the 6th of this year, 2023. So 2 months ago. It's likely November 2024 voters. Right. So they're likely to vote next November, but the survey is February. Was in the field February 1st to the 6th of 2023.
Eric, formulate the questions for this survey. Is the direction on questions driven by the desire to see how successful a parcel tax measure will be, as opposed to a survey generally looking at what's liked and what's disliked?
Eric Feeler, Chief of Government Legislative Affairs. To your question, Chair Coffey, we on our voter surveys are very specifically looking and using the advice of the consultants towards what would motivate individuals to want to support additional funding for the park district. When we do our community surveys, those are much more, as Lisa referenced, much more aligned with what services are we providing, what services are people appreciating that we're providing, and then what aren't we providing that we should be, in addition to facilities and visitor use amenities. So I think the answer to that question depends upon what the objective of the survey is. So the voter survey is different.
Yeah, because I was pondering the question Director Waspy posed, and the answer seemed to be along those lines. If we are toward getting feedback on well, or public safety, for instance, comes up, if perhaps you're thinking about the way you message for parcel tax measure and support for it, framing questions in same terms, the one thing park district is enabled to make our parks and trails a lot safer. Parcel tax might be a positive result that are you favoring just by extending trails and parks or expanding trails and parks. I don't know. It's an interesting question to ponder. When we look to the very first question you displayed of are things going in the right direction, wrong direction by county, are those numbers generally what would expect if the same question were by the counties? But how do you feel about the direction of our country? How do you feel about a direction California. How do you feel about direction in Alameda County? Are those all going to generate the same results?
No, it tend to vary quite different, significantly. So nationally, people are very pessimistic about the country direction for the part of 2 decades. Very, very pessimistic. In the state, we're shaded by partisanship. Republicans, because Democrats run California, it's just very negative about the direction of the state. But in the past few years, we've seen the state numbers bounce up and down based on our budget fiscal situation. The surplus last year, things were looking better. Now it deficit is mentioned next. But no, we find typically voters are positive about situation. So seeing plurality feel negative about the county is surprising, and that's again where I see evidence of inflation and current economic situation impacting people's views.
But what's the question? Essentially, do you as an Alameda County resident think things in Alameda are going
Specifically about Alameda, Contra Costa. If you live in Alameda County, we said Alameda County, Contra Costa, we said Contra Costa County, so it's specific to the county. That
is interesting.
Typically, see people feel better about their government. So it was telling to us about this is a fairly grumpy winter right now.
Even
Yes.
all right, because I was thinking you're just getting the same results if you ask how do you think things are going in the country, specifically to the county. That is rather pessimistic. Grumpy is good. Which is even among progressive constituents. That's surprising because a lot of the grumpiness is toward what's happening in the nation. That's really helpful to progressives and scary. That makes us all nervous. So I guess I'm surprised by the degree it is focused on our county, but it does reinforce what you're getting to. That is that this is a difficult time to present people that asks for money. I was very surprised last November. Martinez measure to raise for Martinez was a lot of money, $20 million by a parcel tax to fund large land acquisition passed barely. Handful to get the 2/3. I was really surprised because we're still COVID uncertainty around the economy. Inflation had kicked in as a writing aspect of our economy at the time, and it passed. So this is in effect, discouraging. Although maybe you could answer the question. I think a local government agency getting 78% approval rate should be jumping up and down with joy. I don't know of many public agencies that are at that level of popularity, and you 50% approval rating, most being cities, school districts, any BARD. Well, let's be fair. That's a heavily impacted service, but even ordinary popular governments, 50% would be good. So if 70% is pretty much off the charts, isn't it?
I mean, yeah, we typically see that firefighters, like that realm is, kind of pulls off the chart. But no, I mean, you're well regarded. And look, I mean, reviewing your past polling, you've had more than 2/3 support for parcel tax, even 2 years ago. So, look, I mean, I don't mean to. This isn't a doom and gloom presentation where
not at all.
coming here, people they hate you and give up, but you're well regarded. Just are in due to external circumstances in a tougher spot than you've been in the past, but you're well regarded. That's why there's opportunity, right? There's hope. There's work to do, as Dr. Alvarez said.
Yeah, and frankly, as I'm listening to you, I set aside the parcel tax issue and shifted right away to what do we, Director Waspy raised it, what does this tell us about how we should proceed various policies that we enact and allocation of our resources and such. And on that level, it maybe doesn't inform us as well as when you're just looking at a parcel tax.
Yeah.
Because I continue to think that telling people spend money on public safety issues very well. I also think if you ask the question of whether you support or spending money to increase access to parks and trails, that would be fairly high, especially COVID, post-COVID period. So it's a different issue than focusing on parcel taxes. Is there, we tested $36 a year this time. Last time I remember we were testing $2 a month as something that was marketable. And I remember that at that point we passed 2/3. And frankly, my reaction was it didn't generate enough money to merit going out. So maybe we went higher this time to see a realistic sum that would be motivated to ask the people for. And that you just got a result that was predictably harder than $2 a month. Did we pull $36 in a voter survey before?
Just to give a little bit of context on the dollar figure.
Yeah.
We, in this particular survey, Ben didn't mention it, but we did also pull for a square footage tax.
Oh, yeah.
And the square footage of like a half a cent per square foot raised something like $50 million annually.
Yeah.
So in order to have a kind of a comparable figure of what would be raised annually, $36 was roughly the equivalent.
That made sense. Thank you. Yes.
And then we had another tiered question where we surveyed on $24, $36, and I think 48. And 36 seemed to be the median. But the 24 surveyed better. And I'd actually would be interested, Ben, I know we talked about it, but as Director Coffey or Chair Coffey has said, so we typically would pull for like $1 a month or $2 a month. And I think when your firm looked at it, you're trying to contextualize it and how it would appear on the ballot. But I just, talk about that.
Yeah, I know, it's a good question. So, Chair Coffey, with your team, we went in detail about the dollar amount, and they expressed your concern about 24. It's like not sufficient. And my experience in these revenue measures, voters support the concept, and the dollar amount is somewhat fungible, right? A few bucks, a few dollars here or there doesn't typically make a difference. So based on past polling, you were 2/3 at 24. That's questionable. Not enough sufficient for your needs was going out. And so our view was, well, test 36 last time at 24, you were threshold. It shouldn't make that big a difference. And on the ballot, you can't say $2 a month. You have to give a dollar amount. And then we tested these varying dollar amounts, and it didn't. 24 was better than 36, but dramatically better. So it told us, one, that the square foot tax was off the table, too high, and voters rejected that. 36 compared to 24 last time was lower, but then we tested 24 as a follow-up, and it was only 2 points better than 36.
Well, that's the answer.
So it even 24, which was like to like from last time, did much worse than 2 years ago when you tested 24. So, but I just want you to know that the thought that your team put into it gave us as context of 24 not quite sufficient, isn't worth going out, so let's do it. And we took that advice of, well, if you're a 20 decent support, and again, my experience is if everything was the same from 2 years ago when you last polled, I wouldn't expect a big difference between 24 and 36, but there was a big difference because of other circumstances. But that's why our recommendation at the end is, okay, we learned, okay, we're not in a 36 setting, go to 24. And then again, can you go lower than 20? have to give us advice on that. Is that just too little money not worth going out? So again, that's
My
our
opinion,
job.
not
Is,
worth going.
yeah, exactly. So that's our advice to kind of, our job is to give you guidance and data and feedback on that.
All right, my last question, maybe a comment to close this, because on the figure that really concerned me was the trust question, because I think we were substantially higher last time. I'm not remembering whether that was the voter survey, which is scientifically accurate, or the community survey, but we had last year a number around, remind me, it was around the 60s, maybe 60s, where do you trust East Bay Regional Parks with or managing your tax money? It's again a number that was often 60-something% approved yes, and now we're down to something 46.
46, correct.
But do I have that differential, Eric? And so right, or right, is that memory from somewhere else? 60-something.
Chair Coffey, your memory is correct. I believe Lisa's actually looking up as we speak, but it was higher. I don't know how significantly higher, but it was higher, and may have actually framed the question slightly differently. We could get back to you with the actual.
Yeah, the actual question. Yeah, because if we are facing some 1 year swing from mid-60s to mid-40s in terms of the trust issue, that to me is significant, though I think to give us the benefit of the doubt that it's part of the grumpiness factor, as opposed to anything we have done to lessen trust people have in our use of their tax money. I think we're very successful in our budgeting, financial performance, and et cetera. As when I handed off the gavel to Director Wasby, I was touting we've been very successful financially. So I'm not seeing something other than general view of grumpiness about the course of things.
And I just in terms of context, I was very interested in surprise is the wrong word, but it was illuminating to me in the survey how much the idea of accountability popped up. So the audits and accountability, that has not historically not been as high as in this particular survey. So there's probably something to that in the broader context of what's on people's minds right now. And I don't know, Ben, if you're seeing that, and I think Lisa may have found.
So this is now our second time asking the question around trust with the East Bay Regional Park District. The last time we did it was recent. It was in May of 2022, and it was on a community survey. So the community surveys are scientifically based, but they're reflective of the community. And so strong agreement was 18%, and somewhat agreement was 47%, with a total of 65% agreed, community based.
My memory is correct, but it was a very different survey.
Correct. It was a
It's-
different
it's-
focus area.
Those are users.
These are all residents.
Yeah, well, residents is a higher percent. I don't know how that works out, but it just doesn't surprise me that we get better results from surveys that are just not scientifically focused on people who actually do it. That leaves my the extent of my concern, but then there was that from 65 to 5, that degree of change. Much different surveys. But 40%, 6% is a high enough percentage. Like to rest on as to voter trust. Okay, I appreciate the background information. It's pretty clear. I think we all have copies of this, and to the degree to which without spending time, there's an ability to juxtapose the key figures against the last voter survey. So we do actually have those. That could be on one page and say flip it back and forth. So that's very too much time. And the other note, just to close, is we are definitely at the height of our popularity in conjunction with the shutdown, lockdown of society and its immediate aftermath when parks open. And when we were out there amongst our public and people were coming to us saying, thank God you kept these parks and trails open during this period of our lives. And, you know, just if you got to account for past few years and a really, really high level of popularity, you can't match that. And you shouldn't expect to, other than 70% is really, really good. It's not the 80 or 90 approach to 90% that we were getting because of lockdown, COVID. I still think in presenting our messaging, ability to refer to these big parks, kept all your parks open, park agencies did not. It's a really good message to continue to convey in terms of abject popularity and trust. Use of our business taxes. That's my thought to go. Public request for comment. So thank you, Ben. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
To item 3, local issues, actions taken by other jurisdictions, also known as SAGE.
The SAGE stand for.
SAGE. Neoma just got up to tell us. Thank you. Strategic actions by other government.
By government entities,
I'm
strategic
close.
actions by government entities, yeah.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Naomi Laval, Principal Planner, Planning Trails and GIS. So yes, I am here to present on behalf of Local Jurisdiction Report, which is a highlights of our weekly SAGE report. So weekly, we go through agendas from various jurisdictions throughout the 2 counties, as well as special districts and kind of points of interest.
Even state agencies.
Exactly, yeah.
I've
State,
recalled some
regional.
very interesting piggybacks we made on state agency approvals due to your folks continually watching them too. So it's a very broad look.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. And as we go through those agendas, we highlight items that pertain to the Park District. And monthly, we come to the Legislative Committee with sort of the ones that we think are the most pertinent, either because they're a project of interest or it's a kind of a final action that somehow or another will pertain to a Park District project. So the first one is I'll be going over 3 today. The California State Lands Commission regarding the Ferry Point pier removal project, Concord City Council and the community reuse project of the Concord Naval Weapons Station, and then Alameda County LAFCO is considering the county's proposal for a new set of agricultural land use designations. There we go. So first up is the California State Lands Commission. They approved on April 7th they approved the lease amendment that will allow the Ferry Point pier removal project to move forward. So that is, there are portions of the historic Ferry Point pier that are kind of falling, and Park District is moving forward with a demolition project. So we're demoing kind of the northern half of the pier and part of the south pier fender wall. So this was one of the last steps that we did in terms of permissions to be able to move forward with this project. Next up is the Concord Community Reuse Project. The City Council has directed staff to prepare a hybrid request for qualifications. And so by hybrid, it really means that they're going to be doing a request for qualifications and request for proposals at the same time. So they will be getting proposals and qualifications. Then that method will really create an equal playing field is the thought. And the qualifications and the proposals are due really by early May. And a lot of this is being driven by the Navy has requested that a specific plan be completed by the end of this year. So this also makes the process much faster because they'll be getting proposals as well as qualifications. They will be selecting their preferred proposal and then hopefully move forward with a specific plan by the end of this year. And then finally, Alameda LAFCO, the county is considering a new set of land use designations for it's the Eastern County region for the agricultural parcels and then the Castro Valley Canyon lands. So there'd be three broad categories: large parcel agriculture, resource management, and water management. This land use designation is really driven towards preserving agricultural lands, especially lands that can be used for vineyards or other sorts of uses. It does not include anything relating to solar policies. So I know that there's been kind of things that have come through Alameda County as well as Contra Costa County with related to large solar projects, but this particular agricultural land use designation does not define solar as one of those land uses as part of the agricultural designations. So those are the three that I have for you today. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, and I think Brian might be on the meeting as well. So if there's anything specific that I can address, I'm sure he can. So I'll go back to the sharing.
Director Wasby.
Yes, could you actually pull up the last slide, East County agricultural? If not, it's okay. My question on that, so that's just for that area that was highlighted. Have we looked at how it may or may not impact the park district? So what you're talking about here is just that East County planning area section, correct?
We haven't submitted comments yet, but it's one of the reasons why we flagged it is that a lot of our parcels would fall into this kind of designation, or we would be purchasing parcels potentially that would be in this designation. I think there's also adjacent land uses. So sometimes we have commented in the past on, proposals for these parcels that might affect the park district. So if there was a large kind of vineyard and kind of event center that was being proposed next to one of our parks or trails, we might comment on that. And so just kind of paying attention to what is an allowed use under these designations kind of allows us to understand, is this something that we want to comment on? They're limiting allowed uses, or just being able to flag for the future that it's a possibility that this parcel next to our parklands could be developed in a way that maybe is a change in use but still allowed.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of efforts in general with Measure D passing, and then also the it's Measure P, the sewer line measure in this area and unincorporated Eastern Alameda County near Livermore. And I know that this when I was on the Zone 7 Water Agency, we're looking at this plan. There's a whole strategic plan for East County that's being developed. The wineries certainly are amongst the leaders of that effort. It's your agriculture that really is referring to the vineyards. I think there's maybe one olive orchard for olive oil out there, but otherwise it's mostly wineries that's driving this. So yeah, it's something that I'm familiar with, and I'd be curious to know what we're looking at in terms of the park district. And I know that there's also a lot of rural private properties in this region with a lot of peaks actually. And there's some trails, and if you go to all trails, they will say, oh yeah, it's private property, but you could go on the trail. And so it's a very questionable whether or not that should be the direction. But yes, I guess I have gone down that rabbit hole looking at what All Trail says about some of these peaks in the very eastern portion of Alameda County.
Sure, staff would be happy to follow up with you a little bit more, especially if we go forward with a comment letter or any sort of communication with staff, with county staff.
All right. Note, I won't take up more of Brian's time, but I was certainly watching Monday night, City of Pittsburgh. And City Council unanimously approved proposed Bria development, which is a hillside up to the ridge housing development of up to 1,500 homes immediately adjacent to the border of Thurgood Marshall Regional Park. And the Planning Commission had disapproved that project. The City Council unanimously voted to move forward with that project. So we continue as we have for several years to have that project literally over the hill from Thurgood Marshall Regional Park. And there are going to be not only planning engagement with the developer of Concord's large reuse area up to 12,000 homes. We're also going to be dealing potentially still some barriers to that project, obviously, but a different developer on the other side of the hill. So that I'll just are there public comments?
No comment.
Requests for public comments on this topic, so we can go on. Thank you, Neela. We appreciate this agenda topic this year.
Yeah, thank you, Director Coffey and Wasby and so on.
And for my colleagues' benefit, they Sage Group are very open to our suggestions. Track. So keep that in the back of your mind if you know of something going on among governments, perhaps interest in terms of Park District long-term plan, parks and trails. Share that. Sage folks. Next item is for funding grants update.
Katie Hornbeck, grants manager. Let me go ahead and share my screen here.
That's Katie. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. All right, can everyone hear me okay and see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so grants update here. As you can see, we submitted 2 applications in the reporting period, basically the month of March. Both were to CAL FIRE. One was specifically for funds to fund our goat grazing program. And then another was a collaborative project with 3 other agencies to basically be doing fuels management, fuels treatment in Tilden or in the Grizzly Peak area. We haven't gotten word yet from CAL FIRE if either application will be moving forward. And then for grants awarded, the one I'll highlight here is the first one, a little under 300,000 from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. So this was kind of an interesting one where they reached out to us and said, hey, we have a little bit of funding left over in this program, the Costco Basan oil spill settlement. And we're reaching out to agencies who were awarded funds previously from this fund source and successfully completed a project. And we're wanting to know, do you have a project in that same area that could use some funding that would basically support, public access or recreation use? And so we had received some funding several years ago to do to put in some like picnic benches and water fountains and things like that out at Miller Knox. And so the timing worked out really well because we have the Ferry Point Pier removal project, and so we proposed that as a project, and they accepted it and gave us this augmentation of a little less than 300,000. So just an example of how sometimes we're not always applying for things. Sometimes they reach out to us and say, hey, we've got this funding. Do you have anything ready? So that is my update, but I'm happy to answer any more questions regarding this report at this time.
Thank you, and thank you for your success with the Ferry Point project today. Director Wasserman.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. Thanks for all your efforts to get us more funding. My question is about the goat grazing request for CAL FIRE. It's $4.1 million. Are we expanding the program? Are we going to spend $4 million in 1 year, or is this over a 5-year program?
It's over a three or 4 year program. And so currently the goat grazing program costs, I think it's roughly $750,000, $800,000 a year, which is what we have budgeted. And so the plan was, let's expand a little bit year by year so we can really go wide and hit areas that we don't always get to. So yes, it's definitely an expansion on what we currently do over 3 or 4 years.
Excellent. That's good to hear.
Director Sanwa.
I don't have any questions, but thank you for this update. This was very helpful.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you, Katie.
Thank you.
Seeing public comment on this item. So item 5, to see briefings. Turning it back to Eric, maybe to introduce, is it Peter or Doug? Peter. Peter Hofer, our federal advocate. I see is on the screen. Hopefully he's not really driving. But Peter, if you want to go ahead and give a brief discussion about the 3 items we have on the agenda, that would be great.
Good afternoon. First topic is the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report, and I'll give a brief summary of that and then touch on 2 other topics on the agenda. You may have seen some headlines related to the report on March 20th. The report was released, and this was a most comprehensive look at climate change yet. It's a compilation of 6 years of reports that you've probably seen touching on various aspects of climate change, but this the report that brought many elements together. It says that the global average temperatures are estimated to rise 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit, above pre-industrial levels, sometime around the first half in the 2030s, as humans continue to use fossil fuels. The report looks at impacts of rising temperatures, impacts that it has on people and ecosystems around the world, and then strategies that countries can use to halt global warming. This number of 1.5 degrees holds special significance in global climate politics. It's in the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement. Virtually every nation agreed to pursue efforts to hold global warming at 1.5 degrees Celsius. Beyond that point, scientists have said impacts would be more heat waves, flooding, drought, crop impacts, species extinction, become even harder to handle going forward. But the Earth to date is warm 1.5 degrees Celsius in the industrial age. So there's a question about how to stem the use of fossil fuels. And that's the goal that is within reach, but is slipping away. So there's a chance to shift course, and that's what the report talks about also. It would require industrial nations to join together immediately to slash global greenhouse gas emissions roughly by half by 2030, stop adding additional carbon dioxide to the atmosphere altogether by 2050. These two steps taken, the world would have about a 50% chance, the experts say, of limiting global warming to 1.5% Celsius. As the chair of the climate panel, Hung Sung Lee said, the pace and scale of what has been done so far in the current plans are insufficient to tackle climate change. We are walking when we should be sprinting. The report comes as China and the United States have continued to approve new fossil fuel projects. And so China last year approved 168 coal-fired power plants of various sizes. The United States has approved recently some of the largest oil drilling projects ever, one including in Alaska. The report was approved by 195 governments. And roughly, these projects, the challenge is that there's this continual project being approved that are fossil fuel based. And in order to meet that goal of 1.5 to 2% degrees, many of these projects are going to need to be canceled, retired early, or stopped altogether because of the challenges that we face now. Doesn't mean that everything is lost, but every fraction of degree of additional warming is expected to increase these dangers I just talked about, which gets into water scarcity, malnutrition, and significant heat waves. Scientists have been talking about the concept of net zero emissions, way to halt heat trapping gas emissions to how quickly nations reach that net zero, though, will determine how hot the planet ultimately becomes. Under the current policies of national governments, the Earth is on pace to heat up 2.1 degrees to 2.9 degrees Celsius this century. So the United States and the European Union have set goals to reach net zero emissions by 2050, while China has set their goal as 2060, and India has set a goal of reaching net zero by 27. In light of the report's findings, though, countries are going to have to move faster, and wealthy countries are going to have to aim to reach net zero by 2040. So, in conclusion, I'll just share a few other thoughts. There are various scenarios that scientists have been most concerned about, and we've seen some of these record-shattering storms in California to extreme drought in East Africa. But as the 2030s, the analysts have said in 2030, we're going to see even more of these dramatic events unless we find a way to really be aggressive in reducing emissions in this decade. And that can come in the shape and form of solar panels to wind turbines to lithium-ion batteries and electric vehicles. And that has helped, but it's not enough, experts say. Nations have made some strides, but more work needs to be done, as building coastal barriers to rising oceans and establishing early warning systems are some of the other suggestions in the report. There's also in the report, it's noted that governments and companies will need to invest 3 to 6 times roughly the $600 billion they now spend annually on encouraging clean energy in order to hold global warming at 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius. There's currently enough capital to do so, but it's difficult still for developing countries. The question is what wealthy industrialized nations will do to help developing countries has been a very divisive issue in these global climate negotiations. I'll just say lastly that you may have seen that the next round of these negotiations, the United Nations will be in December in Dubai. Last year at the climate negotiations in Egypt, language calling on the end of fossil fuels was struck in the final agreement after pressure from several oil producing nations. So all hope is not lost. There has been some amazing technologies that are being developed, maybe not as fast as everybody wants. There's challenges and new innovative thinking going on about how to remove billions of tons of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And that technology is rapidly being used in pilot projects, and there's more aggressive efforts underway. So I'll leave it there on the report itself. I'll give you a brief federal budget update. You probably have seen a lot of discussion about the debt limit and those talks that are been on again, off again between House Speaker and the White House. I'd like to just define up front a couple of terms because it often gets conflated and confused and merged together in these news reports. The federal budget resolution is an accounting of proposed spending. It's a precursor to writing the spending bills, or what I often refer to as the appropriations bills. So not doing a budget doesn't have a practical impact. It is something that is done annually when the White House proposes a budget and then the Congress considers it. And from that process, sets spending limits for what it goes into those spending bills, but it is not binding. The definition of debt limit is a cap on expenditures to pay the US bills already incurred. Not lifting the debt would lead to default and would have many global economic implications. Now, Republicans have been mentioning that they have wanted to block the debt limit to get what they want to balance the budget, equating defaulting on the national debt as a similar tactic to shutting down the government, which is not something that actually Republicans want. So there's been a lot of behind the scenes education going on, what the deficit is, what the debt limit is, and what the federal budget is, as these discussions are ongoing. You may have seen news reports that the House wants to take up a debt limit bill next week, but there's lots of negotiations going on behind the scenes about, is there the requisite number of votes? You have to remember that the Republicans have 4 vote margin in the House of Representatives. So they will need every Republican vote in order to pass any debt limit bill. In that debt limit bill, though, is several different items, including cuts to a variety of different programs, 130 billion, in fact. They would claw back unspent pandemic aid, ease permitting requirements for energy projects, overhaul welfare requirements such as Medicaid, pause the president's proposal on student loan payments, and a whole bunch of other things as well. So it's not just a raising the debt limit bill. It has energy policy in it. It has healthcare policy in it. And I believe this is really the first offer in a negotiation to try and get back to the table and see what is possible. The president said yesterday, after seeing the proposal from the House Republicans, he'd asked that take the default and debt limit, address the debt limit in a clean fashion. Let's have real discussions about the economy and lowering costs and reducing the deficit. Challenge is that the debt limit clock is ticking, and experts say that the US could default as early as June. So far, Republicans are sticking closely to and stating general support for Speaker McCarthy's proposal for a debt limit so far, but in news reports today, several members are asking questions and raising more questions about the actual proposal and rushing for a vote, only having 5 days to look at a fairly substantial bill. I say all of this because these cuts will impact the Park District and anyone who is hoping to get grants, because there would be cuts to those various grants programs if the House Republican bill is enacted. Now, I'll just say a few other things, and that is the Treasury Department is already we're already at the debt limit. The Treasury Department is already taking extraordinary measures, is what they call, to money around to pay its debts. And so that's important to know. It isn't always reflected in the news reports. Last thing I'll just share is on the grasslands bill, there's been some ongoing discussions with Representative Khanna and continuing his discussions with the Senate sponsors of their bill. And that bill would benefit the Park District and other special districts because it would make eligible for grassland conservation, restoration of degraded grasslands, improve rangeland, mitigate threats of wildfire. The grant amounts are not precisely determined in the bill, but it is a substantial amount in the bill overall. And so that was the reason for the keen interest by the Park District in the bill and getting a House bill introduced. So we'll continue to have conversations with the House about proceeding forward with the bill. Representative Khanna has expressed interest in wanting to be helpful in any way possible. And I'm hopeful that we'll get to a sponsorship soon. Be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Very informative, interesting stuff going on. And I will look to the committee for any questions of Peter and his report. Director Song.
Yeah, that was very informative. Thank you. In regards to the March UN report, that you provided a really great summary of what are the conversations, how would you summarize the conversations around this in Washington, D.C. in terms of taking action and really making an effort to address the report? I guess I'll also share, I get the impression that it was a very important report, but then it hasn't surfaced as, a key part of the conversations that are happening in DC, because there is so much focus, as mentioned, on the debt limit and budget and those types of conversations.
Thank you for the question, Director Swalwell. I will say that there's a lot of noise in the system right now, and I don't think that this report nearly got the attention that it deserves, at least from members of Congress. Some did pay attention to it and did make statements on the date of its release. There's been such a hyper focus on the bipartisan infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act, which have key funding mechanisms to address the climate crisis in the United States. But there's not nearly been enough discussion to date in the Congress about how to meet the goals outlined in the climate change report. I like to reference the Inflation Reduction Act it was the dessert. It wasn't the main meal, and it wasn't the vegetables that it should have been. It needed to have policy. It doesn't. They gave out money and they hope that will reduce emissions. It can get you so far, and it's politically easy to do, but they're counting a lot on regulations and the Inflation Reduction Act for the United States to meet its goals. And I think if you were to honestly talk to the experts, that'll get you so far. More will need to be done, but it's a good start. But I also am worried that some of this money will get clawed back And then I don't know where the conversation goes from there.
My other is more of a comment, but there might be a question embedded in the comment. I do support, and I am excited about some of the different carbon capture technologies that are in development and in pilot phase. However, as I've looked at this issue in depth, I think one of the best things we can do is to conserve our wild lands, our forests, our wetlands. Thinking about this grasslands bill and really making that connection in terms of, addressing carbon in the atmosphere and how we can reduce carbon through nature and wildlife. And I'm curious, you mentioned the grasslands bill, and then this most recent March 2023 UN report, might not be the main. So here's my question: may not have been a dominant part of the conversation in Washington D.C. Here, at least some people talking about how important nature and wildlife is in terms of addressing some of the report results in that UN report.
It's a great question, and I know that there's a hyper focus within the current administration to use nature-based solutions to address the climate challenges, whether it's wetlands or wet meadows or any number of other solutions to achieve that goal of 30% by 2030 that the president has outlined. I've seen a real shift, even though it's taken a little while, last 2.5 years. It's really becoming institutionalized in all of the different federal agencies, and even changing the cost benefit analysis so that nature-based solutions are given their fair value when looking at options for various projects. So I hope that's answering your question, but there is more of a focus down to the agency level to look at how a project can have multiple benefits and have nature-based solutions as a component, or holistically is the whole solution to addressing climate change or addressing drought or flooding, depending on the region of the country.
Excellent, thank you. That answers my question/comment.
Thank you, Olivia. Dennis?
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Thanks for your report. I'm not encouraged at the state of the world, but I guess my question would be, we're going to come visit you in 1 month exactly. Is there anything that you could perceive that could change our, we come there, we meet with our delegations, we usually have an ask. Is there anything that's going to change, do you think, in the next month that skew what we're looking for our delegations? Never mind.
Director Waspy, I'll take a stab at that. Certainly the conversation around the debt limit will be very front and center when we are in town. I also anticipate the fact that as Peter mentioned early on, that they're linking the debt limit to the budget and budget cuts. That can get very drawn out and very electric. So I think there's a very good chance that something in that process will emerge between now and then that could make the climate a little bit different in DC. I'd also say that given the international political situation, it's very much a challenge to know where the next thing pop up or pop down. So I would just anticipate this sort of in the sort of world these days that there's likely to be some activity that could happen between now and then that could impact our visit and be a topic. As you'll recall, we went to Sacramento. We hadn't planned on talking about storm damage, but we were very much focused on that front and center because of what happened basically a couple weeks before we went. So predict the unpredictable. The good news is it will be warmer than it has been in the past. So
Based on Peter's report or the UN's report, or it's not summer.
weather.
This might be a little bit different, but I, for different reasons, been following some, the hearings in regards to, the TikTok CEO, DC. And I did listen to an analysis talking about mental health amongst the teenage population. And when someone talked about, an expert on this topic mentioned how getting out into nature is so important for teenagers, and one way and one method to try to address some of the different mental health issues surrounding, surrounding social media, let's say, keep it general. And I'm just curious if this is something that about the federal conversation, and the fact that this is a topic that has been big in DC. And I know it's a little bit different from some of the things we've been keeping track of.
With him to be able to ban Wi-Fi service.
Sorry, I wasn't sure on the question there.
I'll take a stab, Peter. Director Sandlong, that was one of the things that we really did want to test in the survey, and we were a little surprised that the idea of healthy outdoor activity had dropped a bit from the COVID era. Obviously, I will say that younger people today, certainly, you read report after report where the lack of going to school, the lack of the sort of the depression and those kinds of things are pretty prevalent. And so I would anticipate more conversation about that in the legislative arena. I know there's been some discussions at the state level as well, but I don't know if Peter could hear us, but the question really is that there's been some recent reports about the importance of younger people getting outside and experiencing nature, particularly for their psychological health.
I did see a recent CDC survey that talked about the challenges that the young population is facing. I remember back during COVID, there being strong links to outdoors and the importance of people's mental health. I've not seen that link in Congress or discussion about it in the last year or so. I did see a lot of attention, and there was a lot of attention in Congress about the recent CDC survey, but I did not do a deep dive into the CDC survey to see if they had drawn that link to outdoors and nature. But I do remember distinctly hearing from delegations and from members during COVID of the importance and the recognition of how important the Park District was during that time, but all outdoor spaces were for people getting through that difficult period of time. So, but I haven't seen it recently.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. And to Doug Houston, state advocacy.
Can you all hear me okay? We're having some audio problems on the other end, so just, okay?
I can hear you. Yes, great. We hear you.
Terrific. So good afternoon, everyone. Under the heading of not killing the messenger, given that there's been some suppressed polling data more recently. For most indications, our budget is growing increasingly dire. It's becoming a pretty dire situation in California. After the governor signed the budget last year, June of 2022, our revenues began to plummet. They've continued to sink, and more recently, that trend has really accelerated. I, along with a couple people from the administration and the speaker's office, sat in on a speaker's series for Sierra interests just this week. And the message coming from folks within the administration speaker's office is that we should all brace for a protracted downturn, economic downturn, and that things are likely going to get worse before they were going to get better here in California. So just a little bit of context, the governor's budget, he identified a $22.4 billion deficit. But since making this announcement, that imbalance has grown to about $30 billion. And really what's going to complicate matters moving forward and trying to do some real-time decision-making around the budget is the fact that income tax filings, state income tax filings have been delayed or not due until October. So we're not going to have a real-time information of our income tax receipts. And it's going to make the task of true budget balancing pretty difficult. And maybe we might see in late June, just sort of a faux placeholder budget. And it's entirely possible the folks will come back for a special session in October, once we have a better picture of what our revenues look like. But if there is a silver lining, the governor's spending plan proposes to balance the budget without tapping the state's reserves, substantial reserves, $30+ billion. I don't think that's going to hold based on my conversations with folks within the speaker's office in particular. They intend to, along with the Senate, use these reserves as a negotiating tool to try to balance some of these, balance the budget and reduce some of the proposed cuts. So given the challenges governor is facing, among other actions, he's calling for some delays, some reductions, some trigger restorations and cuts in his climate package, what's going to bring that package from 54 billion down to 48 billion in expenditures over the course of the next several years. But most of those cuts are really going to be coming at the expense of the transit and energy sectors. There is a substantial cut being proposed for the State Coastal Conservancy. I would anticipate the legislature will ameliorate that to some degree, but it's still going to be sizable. So as you're aware, and we've had conversations about this in order to make his commitments to investments in combating global warming, he has expressed an interest in advancing a voter-approved funding vehicle for a future election cycle. And that is a resources and climate conservation bond. So for the new board members, or maybe those that aren't entirely familiar with me and Houston Vignani Associates, we cut our teeth back in 2000 on this whole Bond Act journey. And we were recruited by virtue of our affiliation with the district, in fact, in working with then Speaker Antonio Villaraigosa and working on AB 18, which ultimately was Proposition 12, about a $2.1 billion, more heavily park oriented bond back that was approved in 2000. Then after a long hiatus in 2017, we were more recently directed by the speaker, Anthony Brendan, to work with Eduardo Garcia, sort of help him, mentor his staff in advancing a bond, which was ultimately folded into SB 5, which was Prop 68. That was approved in 2018, and considering the fiscal challenges that the state is experiencing, combined with the governor, his continued commitment to investments and climate change, 30 by 30, nature-based solutions access for all, the legislature with the decree of the governor has produced bonds, Senate and Assembly version of a climate resources bond moving forward. And in that, I worked closely with Mr. Garcia over the years, and in particular on Proposition 68. I'm sort of back in that familiar role and asked to assist in the development of some language that addresses assembly and stakeholder priorities. In this capacity, the assembly and Mr. Garcia in particular has extended me and us some creative license, and including some language that's of benefit to the district. So in working with Eric and Lisa, some of the allocations that have been included in the most recent iteration of the bond include an additional $150 million for the Bay Area program. That's up from $100 million. We're trying to advance a per capita program, $350 million, which would result in about $10 million to the district for discretionary spending. We've crafted $100 million for a regional park program that includes environmentally sensitive vegetation management, and something a little unique, which is called equity destination expenditures. And the reason we're trying to include some funding under this category is because we've lacked some success in securing what are called statewide park program grants over the years. So what we're looking to do instead, and a lot of those grants are really driven by how park poor a given community is, economically disadvantaged a community is. And what we're trying to do with this is actually try to create some investments in regional parks that actually draw some of these equity groups to them. What else do we have? $125 million for the California Conservation Corps, with a specific set aside for the construction of a new residential center in Northern California, likely Point Port. There's $65 million for trails, with the possible creation or set aside of a new trails conservancy in the state of California. And then going back to the statewide park program, we've earmarked $125 million for expenditures or grants in communities with 125% of median household income, which makes the park district much more competitive. And then there's a separate $125 million for projects that would repurpose into green space blighted, contaminated lands, which might help for Point Pinole, other shoreline properties. I'll get to the Senate vehicle in a little bit more detail when we get to the bill portion of this agenda. But so I've encouraged discussions to get underway between the two houses, and Eduardo Garcia has in fact reached out to Senator Ben Allen, who is the author of the Senate version, SB 867, to begin the process to collate the bonds. There's much more to come because the administration hasn't weighed in quite yet. I think we have a pretty good understanding of what they might be looking for at the end of the day. And I think between the two bonds, a lot of the administration's priorities are being captured in both bonds. It's my understanding more recently, again, in talking to the administration, that we might see a template or a framework for a bond in the May revise. So more to come that front. So to be clear, the district specific asks are really sort of on the assembly side. It's those asks and that language is going to be vulnerable. I'm going to be looking to you all, the board, and be looking to work with Eric and Lisa and the district to try to coalesce around our Senate delegation a lot of what's contained in the assembly bond moving forward. Again, because I think these funds, if they're not mirrored in both bonds, might be subject to being culled during higher level negotiations. So that's what I have so far.
Doug, thank you for
I'm sorry.
Thank you, Doug. We're gonna take questions now from.
Sure. Okay.
Good. There are any.
I guess my question is, how likely do you think that this bond is going to happen? And I'm just curious if you could give like your prognostication of this.
So, so the governor, when he gave his remarks and presentation on January 10th about his budget, again, because he had to make that difficult announcement that there was going to be some reductions in this climate space, he did in fact comment that he wanted to see a resources climate bond moving forward. So when the administration does that, green lights something like that, that sends a signal to the legislature to begin working on something that's going to be mostly consistent with what the administration is looking for. So part of the challenge, however, is debt capacity. I mean, both these bonds, and I failed to mention this, and I apologize, and they are moving, by the way, are in excess of $15 billion. A bond, it won't be $30 billion. It's going to be one of these two vehicles. However, this bond is only one of 8 that are being discussed, or one of, I guess, between the two, 6 other bonds are being discussed. One around mental health. There's a housing bond. There's an education bond. There's a few food security bond. And then there's more flood specific bond as well. So the question will be packaging these. They seem to be the priorities of many. And, you know, I wouldn't be discouraged by what we ultimately arrive at in terms of the aggregate amount, because if you remember back to 2006, during the Schwarzenegger administration, we had propositions 1A through 1E. And combined, I think they total nearly $40 billion. So I can see this being, again, packaged as sort of an economic development and maybe inflationary combating kind of package to get California up and running in light of the fact that, you know, our revenues are sagging right now. So if you want me to give you, like, I'd say 80%. How's that? 85. I was pretty long-winded. You probably just wanted to hear the number. There you go, 85.
Oh, no, that was really helpful. Thank you.
Yes.
Just thanks, Doug. I appreciate your advocacy, and I appreciate your ability to have been there so long and seen all these ups and downs. Keep up ahead about this whole deal, and I appreciate the fact that you people like Edward Garcia always advocate for us. I guess if you would more time, just tell me that 36 million appointment body is safe. I just need that assurance one more time, maybe 3 or 4 times.
It's safe for now, and I can't remember if it's I believe it's encumbered. And Lisa or Eric could probably speak to this. I don't know how long the district has to actually contract for those funds and begin negotiation on the acquisition. You know, the part of the challenge, and you know this better than I, is the champion for Point Malati and Nancy Skinner will be terming out next year. And regrettably, when you have somebody like that's been serving in such a powerful capacity as Senate Budget Chair, it's a very plum position, and we're going to see leadership change at the end of the year in the Senate, maybe early next year, and with that there will be casualties. So Nancy will more than likely have to step down in that capacity, which is not helpful. But you know, I'm confident the administration has been saying all the right things, and I think at the end of the day that project will be funded.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Are there any requests for public comment on item 5, the advocacy briefings? We can move on to legislative program updates and looking at the recommended bills for support and watch. Eric?
Thank you, Director Coffey. I just wanted to add with regard to the resources bond. We have an opportunity for testimony on Monday. And I believe Dr. Alvarez is going to be planning to deliver some remarks to the Natural Resources Committee. And certainly if board members would like to join her in that experience, that would be totally acceptable and appreciated. So I just wanted to put that out there. I believe the timing is 2:30. Well, you never know for sure what the timing is in Sacramento, but I believe it's scheduled for 2:30.
And the doctor will be one of two, the primary witnesses. There'll be a host of folks there me tooing the bond, but her testimony is going to be much more impactful. And they're very, very interested in 30 by 30.
Sir, I would like to echo the invitation from Eric. I'd like to join you, sir. Welcome the opportunity. It makes for a great experience even in the hallways. And you get an opportunity to visit with Doug and others, and you're part of the process. And it's great just to be there, engaging in conversations with people. I'll be back around time.
What day?
It's next Monday. And this is for the Resources Agency.
Likely, I'd say 4:30-ish probably would be the time. I'm just trying to predict.
Okay, I appreciate it.
Ish, yes.
Person.
They are on California TV, I believe. So the legislature has its own streaming service.
So there's probably a website you could go and watch this.
Yeah. Okay, that's useful. Pending legislation. Yeah, and we can go through them pretty quickly. And just as a reminder, we are seeking one vote for the whole list.
All right.
To make the resolution a little easier for the board, for full board. The first bill is from Senator Daines in Montana, and it deals with the idea of gateway communities to national parks. And we actually, interestingly, have 4 or 5 in the East Bay, given John Muir Land Trust, John Muir House, and Eugene O'Neill Home, and Rosie the Riveter, as well as the Port Chicago 15 neighborhood. Those sites are located in cities that could potentially benefit from the pilot program designated in this legislation. The pilot program really is to determine how many what is the impact of visitation to national parks on local surrounding gateway communities. And meaning, I think from the senator's perspective, this is probably, Yellowstone or Glacier, where the visitation is very high, and they're looking for ways to notify the public about where else they could go. So having a database after the study of nearby facilities that people could visit, as opposed to the parks that are being challenged with needing to have reservations to visit. Could be interesting to see the results of the pilot program for our own purposes, for some of our parks that are being well used and well loved. So it's a good effort to do the research, and think it would be a good program for the Park District to support. Second bill is titled Protect the West, but what it does is set aside a $60 billion funding program. It's a grant funding program, but of that 60 billion, 20 billion is specifically allocated to local governments, including special districts. So that would give us a funding stream there for basically building resilience and wildfire mitigation and watershed health. So another good effort to support. And I believe that funding, I'm trying to remember, I think that comes through the Department of Interior. And then the next bill, Safe and Quiet Skies, the committee and the full board has acted on that legislation in the past. It really gets to the point of drones flying over national parks and also some of the other protected national lands. It would implement a half-mile buffer that restrict the drones from flying in. This is particularly of interest in Hawaii, where people are taking pictures of the volcanoes there. But it would also be providing states and local governments the ability to prohibit some of these flights over parks, and that is particularly important because most, depending upon how high in elevation something is, most of that is regulated at the federal level. So this empowers more control over the lower flying items like drones. The next bill is strictly coastal funding for coastal resilience. And it would be administered by the NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And these projects would be very much the nature-based solutions that we were talking about earlier. In addition to that, it would also fund projects that remove, as you can see here, I guess, marine debris and other things in water that would potentially impede fishing industry and other safety measures. So it's kind of a wide scope of what the bill can fund, and it's 10 billion over the next 10 years. So a possibility for us along the Bay shoreline. And then the last bill, I'm actually going to see if
So our final piece of legislation, HR 1242, by a member of our delegation, Mr. Garamendi, is seeking to increase the accounting of emergency response conducted by the military and support streamline of partnerships when the military is taking a role in wildfire response. So currently there is a number of red tape layers for the military to conduct wildfire response. They've worked through it, but this bill would help streamline that so the military can smoothly work with state and federal agencies. And then additionally, it's the interest of Congress to understand how much funding military is spending on wildfire response. So they would request that wildfire become a separate line item in the budget, which would be interesting to see at a federal level what those numbers are.
Thank you. So, and then for the first state bill, Doug, question.
Yeah.
Question.
I have a quick question. In terms of active military sites in the East Bay, where there might be, because I remember last summer there was a fire at Camp Parks in Dublin, and so I was just curious. That also fall under this type of legislation?
If a fire were to occur on military land, I think that's already responsive. But if that fire were to come then onto our jurisdiction, onto the Tassajara Creek Trail, my impression is that it would support reimbursement to the agency that provided response to that fire, which was the responsibility of the military to respond to. So in a way, yes.
Okay, thank you.
State legislation. And for the first item, this is the Senate version of the resources bond. Doug already touched on it in his remarks, but do you have anything in addition to add to that, Doug, since it was?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So in your bill description, describes the bill as being more skeletal. The S8B 867 was amended 2 days ago. Some teeth were amended into the bill, and I've shared a high-level analysis update with Eric Elise on that. It's a $15.5 billion bond. In terms of how it deviates from the bond I was describing, Mr. Garcia's bond, is they're very, very similar in a lot of ways. Where they part company is that this bond actually has a clean energy component. And 1567 has a much more robust investment in urban settings, parks in particular, extreme heat. And the Garcia bond has an unallocated sum of money right now at nearly $3 billion, which means it's not identified for any category of funds. So it's a slush fund that is more than likely going to be directed to, again, clean energy, but I think they're intending to use some of those additional funds and maybe even increase the amount to try to reconcile what they're doing with the Ben Allen bond 867. So again, there's a lot of good opportunities in this bond. It's much more programmatic. It doesn't have a lot of those nuanced investments. None of those nuanced investments I described that were specific to the district. But we have all year to work on this, and again, 85% convinced we're going to have a bond at some point, be it March or next November.
Thanks, Doug. The next legislation is basically for CAL FIRE to honor the certifications that formerly incarcerated individuals receive when they go through a California Conservation Corps camp program. I think that's a good thing to be supportive of, and something that also Senator Glazer is interested in on the Senate side. On the next bill is basically any fourth grader family who has one of the federal Every Kid in a Park or Every Kid Outdoors pass. The state park system would honor that and allow free entry. That would have a impact to Crown Beach and Del Val. We don't really have entrance fees at McLaughlin, but it would be included as part of that free pass entryway. And the last bill is the Bicycle Safety Handbook. One might wonder why this isn't already in existence, but it's a compilation of laws for safe bike use. It would be something that would be useful for our trails crew, but also our trails team, but also for public information for our users to know what is a safe use in some of our parks. So with that, those are the bills recommended for support, and I like to consider them under one item, but I'm also happy to answer any questions on any of the bills that we just discussed. Okay, let's see if there are questions on the state pending legislation recommended for support. Directors? Nope. So good.
No question.
All right, I would suggest we take them separately, and the concept is that we're all willing to vote yes on the whole batch. So if any of us are hesitant about any of the individual bills and supporting them, we should pull that out and vote on it separately, sort of like a consent calendar is my suggestion. So first set would be Exhibit A, federal legislation for support. Is there a motion to approve? There is.
And I'll second.
Director Solomon seconds. So please take the roll on support of the federal legislation for support as presented.
Chair Coffey,
Aye.
Director San Juan,
Yes.
President Waspi.
Aye.
Motion passes. And having jumped the gun, I'm assuming we don't have public comment requests on pending legislation.
Do not.
Okay, so I didn't jump the gun. Let's go to Exhibit B. This would be pending state legislation recommended for support.
I'll make a motion to support all of them.
Director Waspi seconds. This is to approve the list of state legislation recommended for support. Please call. Ashley?
Chair Coffey,
Aye.
Director San Juan,
Yes.
President Waspi.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Ashley, so Eric, if I'm right, we're still on legislative program updates, projects and programs, item B.
Chair Coffey, we did have three.
Recommended watch. I just skipped it.
Yeah, and this doesn't require a vote, but we did want to bring to the committee's attention three bills that would be benefit or of interest to the park district. The first is establishing a grant program for swimming lessons. And obviously that would be something that we would support. And I don't know if Doug has insight, but the representative that's introduced both this bill and the next one is a Republican from Southern California. So ensuring passage of that would be seemingly unlikely in the given the balance in legislature. The second bill the Assembly member has is a study of beach erosion. And that would be helpful to identify opportunities to improve beach conditions, particularly beneficial for Crown Beach Memorial State Beach. The last bill, it would impact potentially our camping facilities out at Del Val. It essentially establishes a program for if you cancel or if weather cancels your reservation at a state park campground, you would get future camping credits. And then it also provides for a vision for a reservation lottery system. So for campgrounds that are very popular and were subscribed, this would introduce a lottery system for individuals to get a site. So I do believe that would impact our operations at Del Val, not necessarily a policy challenge, but it could be an operational challenge. So I just wanted to bring that to the committee's attention as well.
So this is for this last one, item 3, it's a watch because it's not clear how impact state parks that the state park system operates. So you're waiting to see.
Exactly.
Is there opposition? Does state parks serve opposites? Do you know?
That is actually a very good question, Director Coffey. So we should. My sense is they probably support it, but I that's a good question. It's just curiosity. I'm going to take time.
All right, so no action on watch items. Are there any questions? Just one, so do we really watch these? Because if they do come out, do we revisit them? I hesitate to be against swimming lessons for underserved youth.
If the committee would like to add that to something that they support, I then would totally entertain that, and I get that sentiment.
It's just because it's a Republican. I don't give a damn. I like to see kids learn how to swim.
I mean, I used to be a swim instructor, so it actually is very near and dear to my heart. So I
don't think it's a partisanship issue as much as legislation's viability. Our staff to hesitate. So if there appears to be some viability, this legislation probably would have a committee that wants to support.
the only things I see special districts are not eligible at the current moment, but I mean, I wonder if there's a way we can support, and then if we support it, if there's a way we can then reach out and request special districts. I'm not sure if that's.
We're happy to take the next steps at the will of the committee. Just by way of context for the watch, what it means is we're flagging it for you as the board members. If this is legislation that has a nexus to the park district in some way, it then goes on to the staff watch list where we monitor the legislation as it moves forward. And then should amendments make it something that we feel a position should be taken on, bring it back to this committee for a vote. However, we would love to take any actions involved as well.
I don't know if our support or a letter of support, whatever we do, has any influence on anything, but just kids learn how to swim. I think a barrier is money. I think it's why we support. Okay, take another look at that one.
Yeah, what I might suggest is due diligence, and we can bring it back the next to just sort of ground truth what impact it might have. That's my sense of the committee.
Thank you. All right, now projects and programs. Please.
Right. So our next item is just a brief update on our community project funding asks. As the board is well versed with our annual opportunity, hopefully continue to be annual for direct funding. That as an see work directly with elected offices to advance. And so what we wanted to share with you all today is that we have heard back from 2 offices. The Office of Representative Garament shared with us that they will be moving forward to the next stages. Our request for $900,000 for the Martinez Bay Trail. So if you bump into Representative Garamendi or others at an event, we wanted to make you aware of that. And secondary is that Representative Swalwell's office has confirmed that our request for $2 million for wildfire response and vegetation, not wildfire response, the bill for vegetation management and ecologically sensitive vegetation management is also advancing. And so if you run into Representative Swalwell or a member of his team, please do express our appreciation. And then the last on this list is Senator Feinstein's office. We provided them the application and all relevant materials, but we've yet to hear back either positive or negative. So just sharing that as an opportunity. And for Senator Feinstein, it was the complimentary $2 million request that goes with Representative Swalwell's.
Understood. Questions? Seeing none. Go ahead to the next item, which is 6C site visits.
Just a quick comment. We had been asked to testify for the resources bond on Monday of this week. Tuesday of this week, and we're not able to participate in that testimony process. So we'll be going back on Monday of next week, as we already mentioned. And then obviously this was printed before we knew we were going to be testifying on Tuesday. Right. And then on the DC Advocacy Conference, just a very, very quick overview of this plan schedule as it stands now, and making a more formal presentation to the board on May 2nd and providing a board memo with background for the different meetings that we are intending to have. But for the sort of the themes of the day, our Monday, we'll be having a briefing from Peter mid-morning, and then going to the Senate office buildings. Well, actually, it's just the Hart office building for both Senator Padilla and Senator Feinstein. There may be also an opportunity on that day to do a site visit, either at the Lincoln Memorial or potentially a meeting with National Park Service. Peter is still working on those meetings. On Tuesday, we plan to go to, I believe it's the Rayburn building for delegation visits. And then on Wednesday, we'll be seeking to go to the Cannon building for delegation visits. And on one of those 2 days, we're also hoping to have a meeting at the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation to discuss America the Beautiful and that grant program, and how we want to make sure that we're eligible on future rounds. Currently, our eligibility is not as strong as it should be. And then, as I mentioned, we're also working on meetings, a meeting with the National Park Service, and Peter is reaching out to the Vice President's office to see if there's an opportunity to meet with some of her staff. So that's the lay of the land as of now. Thursday's being held in case there are meetings that don't fit into Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And we are also looking into an opportunity for White House tour that morning. However, it's such a popular place that you need to book those reservations 4 months in advance. So UP is doing her yearly work to work with Representative DeSaulles' office on seeing if we can actually manage to get some tickets on short notice. Be great. Thank you.
That's great.
I guess my only question is, does it make sense to try to pursue something up in our Department of Transportation, Department of Defense? I know that we tend to work with those agencies as well, but also EPA.
Well, first of all, to answer the question on Department of Transportation, we have met with them several times in the past, and there's been a bit of a shift in their approach to how they handle visitation because we had hoped to talk to them about a raise grant application. But they're kind of once you submit the application, which we have submitted, they are now going basically silent. They don't really want to meet with you. Some of the other agencies, maybe we can talk offline and see what you're thinking in terms of like the EPA. We tend to try to be cautious in what we are meeting with in order to use the benefit, make sure we're using the time wisely because these are hard meetings to get. And so if we don't have a real strong pending issue, we may or may not want to pursue anything like that. And we also don't want to have you be too busy. It's a very tiring trip.
Okay, two quick comments on my part. I really like the idea of trying to get together with VP staff, if that's at all possible. And I like connections, maybe possible to discuss the exoneration of it, obviously. Any other connections we can make in person, PC, that would be helpful to our exoneration efforts vis-a-vis the Port Chicago 50. And the other is, unless we want to stay on our own for extended periods in DC, which is always nice, actually, especially that time of year. I'm planning back on Friday. That seems to be safe. I know it has sometimes Friday seems like safe to plan on coming back. Correct. Let's turn my mic on. We're moving to public comment generally. Any requests, Ashley?
There are no public comments.
Seeing none in the room. The last item on our agenda, which is board comments. Members of the committee.
I don't believe I have any additional comments. I guess tomorrow's Earth Day, so talking about that informal before, it's just acknowledging that that's an important day of recognition within our park since on a Saturday. I know I'm trying to figure out my itinerary for tomorrow.
It's perhaps not remarkable, but I find it to be the busiest and hardest scheduled day of the year for us park directors because of the numerous events we go to each of our wards. I have to balance all of them, try to make a few, including our own. We're going to have a nice crew out at Brioni's and the ongoing education efforts on the Bible project out there will be happening Saturday, Sunday. Perhaps even
just information, I attended a HASPA meeting last Thursday, and once again, they were just away, and I think it was the first meeting since we got the meeting when you guys proposed the legislative visit to Shoreline, and I'm inviting everybody. They thought it was really great, and they were amazed by the draw that folks have and the park district has to get people for support. I mean, that young man, I'll never forget that young man from nuisance on the side. Did you identify him or did he just show up? I've never seen anybody have a nuisance come to our visits, and he was suggesting he was going to help us save the day himself. But I love enthusiasm. So I once again, I just expressed a young feeling of the trustees and the tech staff.
Director Waspy, that's a combination of skill and luck. Laura Shantos was able to reach out to the governor's office and identify field reps that would potentially come. And that individual that you're speaking of actually lives in Hayward, so was very much enthusiastic about the visit. And if I may take a moment to address Director San Wong's comments, our acting legislative assistant, Ashley Renee, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, but did send around to our elected official offices all the activities that we have planned for Earth Day. So our elected officials, both state, federal, and I believe county, are all aware of what we're doing tomorrow in our parks.
Do we know if we have an RSVP for? From the people we emailed? Yes, I don't have that. That's the response.
And then, so are we still, appreciation is it next Friday?
Oh, no. We rescheduled for September.
Okay.
So that's a very good reminder that we need to notify you. Sacramento.
Yeah, because it's in our calendars.
Thank you for bringing it up.
Good.
Fridays.
In Mark to
All right, Dr. Alvarez, closing.
Thank you. I appreciated the good discussion today. There's a lot to do here, and every day at the Park District is Earth Day. Yes, absolutely. But it's very exciting to see people coming together on behalf of the planet and Mother Earth. Yes, absolutely. So I thank you for coming out and showing up tomorrow on your day off. Truly appreciate it. And I just wanted to let you know that while we're not able to provide testimony in person in real time at the Water Parks and Biodiversity on Tuesday, we were able to get in testimony on public record. So there's that. And definitely be Sacramento Monday to natural sources to try to say. Thank you again for your advocacy. I look forward to continue. Very critical time for us.
Thank you, Anna. I want to thank Peter, Doug for attending. Resources to available to us during that. Amongst our best wishes to Flora and Child. Happy for her family, and welcome Ashley out from Sinton or
Del Val.
And glad to have you out with us and thank you. Folks who put this together, Alex, Deborah, London, out and back. Thank you all. Stay adjourned.